Hello, I am going to be using the Hwa Chong answer key to go through question 1 of A level 2022 paper 1. I will not be going through question 2 because I think question 2 covers a lot of things that I don't think are that testable outside of this particular CSQ. But I feel that question 1 is very, very good for teaching and learning because there are a lot of things I want to point out, not only about how you answer CSU questions, but also about the concept as well. And this is also a very, very good question, by the way, that shows how micro and macroeconomics can actually be combined into one CSQ. Okay, actually, this particular A level paper, right, both the question 1 and question 2 got some micro, some macro. So yeah, it was quite interesting. In fact, in the past, right, in the past, like before 2020 or so, if you look at the older TYS papers, you will see that there are a lot of, in fact, most of the CSQs, right, you can see either question 1 is clearly micro, question 2 is clearly macro, or the other way around. But recently, especially with the new syllabus from 2023, of course, including the syllabus this year in 2026 lah, um, they have tended to move away from that neat split between micro and macro CSQ. So just be prepared to answer both micro and macro in the same question. Okay, so I don't have a copy of the question paper because naturally A level question papers are available hard copy only, and I haven't been bothered to scan this, but I presume you have the TYS with you, so you can just look at what I'm looking at. And in addition, yes, I'm using the Hwa Chong answer keys uh because I don't have a choice, not because I particularly like the Hwa Chong answer keys. Okay, so let's get started. uh this one quite unusual. They give you 2 times 2 marks and they ask you to draw 2 DDSS diagrams in the first part of the CSQ. Other than the fact that it's a terrible amount of space to take up for just a 2-mark question, right? Ultimately, the problem is your explanation is 1 mark, your diagram is 1 mark. Same thing for part 2. This should be part 2. Your diagram is 1 mark, your explanation is 1 mark. So a lot of people, right, they don't know how much or how little to write for the explanation. Truth be told, I'm not too sure either. This is just a suggested answer sent by Hwa Chong. Okay, so econs, as you probably know, does not practice half marking. For all the short structured questions, that is to say the first 12 marks of a CSQ question is all point to mark. Okay, so I presume this entire paragraph therefore is even. You have to get everything in this paragraph to add to get your 1 mark, else you do not get your 1 mark. So when you are doing demand supply, you need to identify your demand or supply factor. So in this case, if I want to say that supply decreases from S0 to S1, I have to have a supply factor. So in this case, a drought is obviously my negative supply shock. That's my supply factor. And then I have to link it to price. So in order for price to increase from P0 to P1, I need to talk about a shortage. Because price, right, ultimately price will not anyhow increase or decrease. You need to have a shortage to put an upward pressure on price, or you need to have a surplus to put a downward pressure on price. Okay, if this was not a 2-mark question, if this was an essay question or even a 4-mark question, we can go through the full market adjustment process for this. So this is the diagram. If I want to go through the full market adjustment process, right, I need to talk about a couple of things. So at the original price P0, there is going to be a shortage. This shortage is the thing that is labeled in pink over here. Because the quantity demanded, I'm looking at the original price P0. So I'm just looking at this particular price line over here. This dotted line here, okay? So on this dotted line, my quantity demanded is where this horizontal dotted line here intersects the demand curve. That's at this point here. And I go down, my quantity demanded is Q. Sorry, my quantity demanded is Q naught. And this quantity demanded is greater or more than the quantity supplied. Where does my horizontal line here intersect the supply curve? Remember, the new supply curve is now S1. So I want to find where it intersects this part S1. It intersects over here at Q2. It's greater than quantity supplied Q2. So hence, because of this shortage, there's an upward pressure on price from P0 to P1. Okay, and then that is not all. If you want to write about the full market adjustment process in an essay, especially in an essay, so this explanation is very, very relevant for your part A essay. You need to talk about how producers and consumers will respond to your increase in price. Because so far, this entire thing, right, only tells me how my price go from here to here. It doesn't tell me why does my equilibrium quantity decrease from Q0 to Q1. So I must talk about how this equilibrium quantity come about. So in response to this increase in price, producers will actually increase their quantity supplied. Do you see why? Because the signaling feature of the price mechanism, what if equilibrium price increases, then it signals that consumers are willing and able to pay a greater amount. So of course producers will respond to this, being profit incentivized, but increasing the quantity supplied from is currently at Q2, right? And it will increase to Q1, where S1 equals to demand. While consumers will respond to this by decreasing their quantity demanded, because now the price is higher. So they decrease their quantity demanded from originally quantity demanded we said was at Q0, I decreased to Q1. That is why Q1 and E1 is my market equilibrium quantity. Okay? So that is how you write the market adjustment process. I need to show both how price increase and how quantity decrease. And of course, you have this market adjustment process for surplus, for a change in demand, etc. All that, of course, you can. Okay? So this is just to show you how to do it, just to revise the concept, because I'm saying I'm not only going through this CSQ, I'm not only showing you how to answer CSQ, I also want to use this for teaching and learning purposes to go through content, okay? So next, international tourist arrivals into Australia are expected to fall as a result of the bushfires. So this is a question about what is this about. If you look at the question, right, it's a bit ambiguous. The question talk about international tourist arrivals. Arrivals is what? Is this demand or is this quantity demanded? If this is quantity demanded, right? So why is it that quantity demanded, or rather market equilibrium quantity in the Australian tourism market decrease? It's because I need to identify a demand factor, right? So my demand factor is taste and preferences. So they didn't put it in the mark scheme, but I feel that it's good to have. If you look at extract one, if you flip to extract one, you see that that there's this particular phrase in extract one. They talk about smoke haze and uncertainty about safety. So because of this uncertainty, people so-called perceive travel to Australia to be more dangerous. That's why their taste and preferences have been changed or altered. So now, because of these changed tastes and preferences, people do not like to go to Australia as much anymore. So their demand for travel to Australia will decrease from D0 to D1. And therefore, my output or tourist arrivals or my market equilibrium quantity will decrease from Q0 to Q1. Can? Okay. I think that is actually all the micro in this CSQ. Everything else here is macro. So it's going to get fun. Okay. Next, with reference to the data, explain one possible reason for the change in Australia's budget balance. Can you flip to page 3 now? Flip to page 3, look at extract 3 and figure 1 now. Look at extract 3 and figure 1. Take some time. Okay, so if you look at figure 1 on page 3, you will see that Australia's budget balance went from a surplus in February to a deficit in June. Okay, why might this be, people? So you can argue that one possible reason for the change is talking about the expenditure. Because ultimately, what is budget surplus? At the bottom of figure 1, they actually got tell you, you read the caption at the bottom of figure 1, okay? At the bottom of figure 1, they will say, the budget balance is the difference between government spending and government revenue. Uh, so a lot of people, right, they might think, oh, budget balance is expenditure minus revenue, but no, it's the difference. Intuitively, right? How do I explain this? Okay, what other part of your economics syllabus have you encountered this some kind of balance, right? Can have a surplus or a deficit. It's the balance of payments or the balance of trade, right? So what is the balance of trade? It's revenue minus expenditure. Likewise, budget balance is just total government revenue minus government expenditure. So as it says in extract 3, if I spend all of this money, the government spending extra 70 to 90 billion on yada yada yada, this means that my expenditure, this thing, will increase. That's why I worsen my budget deficit. Okay? So you have come across this term actually before, budget surplus and budget deficit, when we are talking about expansionary fiscal policy, right? When we are talking about expansionary fiscal policy, I got say, oh, in order to increase AD, I need to increase C, by decreasing personal income tax. I need to increase I by decreasing corporate tax. And I need to increase G. When we learn expansionary fiscal policy, I say, how do I increase G? I increase G by running a budget, surplus or deficit. Deficit, right? So while we were learning expansionary fiscal policy, this term, deficit, might have seemed a bit paradoxical considering that we're looking at everything positive here, everything increase. So how come suddenly in a paragraph full of things that are good, right, I suddenly got one term that seems a bit negative, deficit. Even to me, while I was in fact, right, even right until I did this CSQ and properly understood what is meant by budget balance, right, I was also confused by this all the way until what day is it? Yeah, all the way until yesterday. Actually, when I did this CSQ myself, I was confused. But yeah, do you see now that if I run a budget deficit, right? Then I run a budget deficit by increasing government expenditure. Then only I can increase G, increase AD. That's my expansionary fiscal policy. Okay, so I hope you can see the links here. Now let us go to part C. Part C is asking, with reference to figure 2, explain why a nominal rate of interest will be described as being negative in real terms. Okay, I do not like this answer key. I do not like this answer. If you look at extract 2, right, I can't show you the extract, but if you flip to page 2 now, go to page 2, go to extract 2, can you find in extract 2 where is this part? Okay, there's a part in extract 2 that says as follows. Where is that? In extract 2, okay, there's a part that says a rise in the consumer price index, CPI, of 2.2% in the 12 months for to March 2020 has made the real interest rate negative. Can you find the part in extract 2 where it says this? Okay. Now, when the extract says the consumer price index rose by 2.2%, two things, okay? Number one, rose by 2.2% means is cost of living increasing or decreasing? Cost of living is increasing, right? From anecdotal experience, when we say that cost of living is increasing, am I looking at inflation or deflation? Things becoming more expensive or things becoming cheaper? Obviously, things becoming more expensive, right? Because what is consumer price index, people? So consumer price index, CPI, is measuring the cost of living in a country or measuring the purchasing power. So you might recall, right? I forgot what's the explanation used in your lecture notes. I be honest, okay, wait, let me just pull up the e-notes right now. Let me find a place where they talk about cost, where they talk about uh I find the place where they talk about consumer price index just because I have my own understanding of consumer price index, but I just want to align it more carefully with the way that HCI lecture notes explain consumer price index. I know a lot of us have become quite have some varying opinions on HCI lecture notes, but ultimately we are from HCI, unfortunately. So we still need to refer to the lecture notes. Okay. Yeah, as you can tell, I don't bookmark the site because I use it so seldom. Let's go. Consumer price index, we learned it when we were talking about inflation under macroeconomic aims, price stability in chapter 6. Here we go. Meaning of price stability is somewhere here, right? Yeah, measuring. So you see when they talk about consumer price index, right? Consumer price index, they talk about a weighted price index. So they talk about a common basket of goods and services. So when we are calculating consumer price index, we when we have this concept of a common basket, right? We fix the basket of goods to contain a certain combination and quantity of goods. So we say, okay, to compare the consumer price index for Singapore, I'm going to imagine the theoretical existence of a basket containing Milo, rice, and fish. Let's say that's good X, Y, and Z, okay? Just as a hypothetical example. So I said, oh, my base year in 2010, Milo, rice, and fish cost like that, like that, and like that. But then in 2018, 涨价了 inflation, people complain. Now, because I have the same quantity of goods, okay? Objectively, the utility that I get from consuming this same basket of goods, ultimately, whether it's 2010 or 2018, whether I spend very little money or a butt ton of money, I still only get one sack of rice, one can of Milo, and one fish. Okay, but then because I pay more, my cost of living is higher to get the same good. Okay, and because my cost of living is higher, but I get the same quantity of goods, the same quality of goods in this common basket of goods, that's why I can also, the way I like to think about it is that the purchasing power of the currency has decreased. Not because the value of the currency itself changed. It's because general price level GPL got changed. Understand? So we can relate this back to uh inflation rate. I actually do not like how the HCI answer key says inflation rate in March 2020 was 2.2%. Because that's actually not what the extract says. If you look at what the extract says, right, the extract says rise in the consumer price index of 2.2% in the 12 months to March 2020. So this implies, right, they measure the amount of money you need to pay for this common basket in Australia in March 2019. Then in March 2020, based on the value of the Australian dollar at that moment, they take another measure of how much money you need to pay for this basket of goods in March 2020. And they find that the difference between the first measurement and the second measurement is 2.2%. So, people, is this headline inflation or is this core inflation? Can you think of it? Let's go back to the definitions, okay? Headline versus core inflation. Do they talk about that? Okay, never mind. I'm just going to Google this to show you. If you Google, what is the difference between headline versus core inflation? You see that headline inflation tracks the total cost of all goods and services. Core inflation excludes volatile categories, food and energy. So by right, food is included in headline inflation, it's not included in core inflation. But a common basket of goods is not just food. I know I use food items to illustrate, but this common basket of goods, if the rise in the consumer price index means that I need to spend more money to get this same basket of goods, I'm looking at headline inflation of 2.2%. So it is not the case that the inflation rate in March 2020 was 2.2%. Because what this sentence in the answer key implies, right, is implying that at the moment, the instantaneous rate of change in general price level was 2.2%. That's not the case. I'm just saying that over a period of 12 months, from from March 2019 to March 2020, the average, like the net rate of inflation during that 12-month period was 2.2%. It is not the case that the instantaneous rate of change of GPL at that point in time was 2.2. Please get this clear. Okay, please make this clarification in your own copy of the HCI answer key if you need to. Whoever, I will not say anything else about HCI and econs because I will get myself very angry. Okay, so how does this link to it being negative? Think, okay, when was the last time you encountered the terms nominal and real? You last encountered this when we were talking about SOL, right? You remember real GDP versus nominal GDP. So notice that, right, when I measure real GDP, I talk about GDP with respect to some kind of base year prices. Likewise, when I talk about consumer price index, CPI is also measured with respect to some kind of base year prices. I can't go to that tab now because where my cursor is right now, where I'm trying to click to that tab, is also where the tab to control this recording is, very annoyingly. I hate Windows. Kidding, I don't hate Windows, I love Windows. Anyway, because the inflation rate is high, so if this thing increase, but my nominal interest rate stays the same, this thing has not changed. My nominal interest rate is still the same. That's why my real interest rate, if 0.25% and then my inflation rate is greater than 0.25%, then of course 0.25 minus 2.2 is negative lah, minus 1.95%. Okay, so yeah, this is how you link consumer price index to inflation, just to clarify this, because I think the way that this answer key has been written is might be very slightly ambiguous on this area. Okay, yeah, I hope that's politically correct enough to say. Let's go on. D, explain how this negative real interest rate is likely to affect savings and the exchange rate. Okay, I would like to point out a mistake that I myself made yesterday when I was doing this CSQ. Okay, I think we can all understand how savings will decrease because negative real interest rate, right? Remember how our interest rates determine, people. How our interest rates determine? This isn't in the syllabus, but it's in the appendix of your notes. Your tutors might have showed you this. The liquidity preference theory. Okay, so basically you have money supply and money demand. If I want to decrease, okay, I don't want to push it into the negative in the moment because that would be a pain in the ass to draw. So let's just say I want to make it very, very low. In order to decrease interest rates, right, I need to increase the supply of money from MS0 to this point here, MS1. Okay, why is money supply vertical? Money supply is vertical because ultimately the value of money and the quantity of money does not change with the quantity demanded. Because who controls money supply? The central bank, right? So even if every investor in the world suddenly wanted to borrow Australian current take on loans in Australian currency, buy Australian assets, all that, if the central bank decides not to increase the supply of money, the supply of money is just perfectly price inelastic. Understand? So interest rates will decrease from IR0 to this level here, IR1. Okay? It's going to be IR1. And as a result of this decrease in interest rates, right, your central bank decreases interest rates. Your central bank is the one that controls the supply of money. Your central bank is the one that controls the interest rate. So if the central bank controls the interest rate, then other commercial banks, because ultimately, right, you are saving in savings banks, right? Things like POSB, OCBC, etc. I'm using Singapore example just to uh illustrate it for you. Okay, so if the central bank decreases its interest rates, then commercial banks will use the central bank interest rate as a guide. So if the central bank decrease interest rates, then commercial banks will also decrease their own interest rates. So if the real interest rate becomes so damn low that it becomes negative, right? Then what does this mean? This means that the more you leave your money in a savings account in the savings bank, if the interest rate is negative, means you're losing money, you're not gaining. I mean, as it is, even in really, really, really good times, your bank interest, like your savings account interest, is barely enough to keep up with inflation. If your savings account interest becomes negative, right, then obviously you're going to want to get your money out of the savings account so that you don't lose money what. So that's why if there's fall in savings, that is also why this kind of monetary policy increases. If people don't save, what do instead? They take their money out of the savings account and do what? Keep at home, no, right? They take their money out of the savings account and they spend money. Induced consumption increases AD. Understand? That's how expansionary monetary policy works. That is also why you sometimes hear on the news, oh, the US Federal Reserve has decreased its base interest rate level from yada 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 to yada yada yada. Why does it decrease interest rates? Because it wants to make people take their money out of savings banks and put their money on things that can be bought. Buy more, then only can induce C, increase AD, increase RNO via K effect. Understand? Perfect. Now, this is the harder part. I confess, right, when I did this ESQ yesterday, 这2分我得得到，这2分我得不到。Why? Because I made the same misconception that I'm about to explain to you now. I thought at first that if I have a negative real interest rate, I have a very, very, very low cost of borrowing in the economy, right? So I was thinking, hey, if my cost of borrowing is very low, that would encourage investment, right? That is the case. This would be a perfectly valid answer if the interest rate wasn't negative. If the interest rate was still positive but just super, 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 super low, then you can technically argue, okay, if my interest rate is low, then it means that my cost of borrowing has decreased. Therefore, investors will become more willing and able to. Are you familiar with the MEI curve? You remember the MEI curve, marginal efficiency of investment. I have interest rates on this axis, quantity of investment on this axis, right? So at a given MEI not, if my interest rate decrease from here to here, then what will happen to the cost of borrowing? The cost of borrowing will decrease, right? So as a result of the cost of borrowing decrease, my quantity of profitable investments, because ultimately people will only take an investment if it's profitable, what? Unless you're investing on stupid things, in which case you probably won't go and consider the profitability anyway, because yeah, but if you're running a Fortune 500 company, of course you're going to do a analysis and determine if the investment is profitable or not. So for this analysis, we assume that people will only take on investments if they determine the investment to be profitable. So as a result of the lower interest rate, as a result of the lower cost of borrowing, the quantity of profitable investments, and therefore by extension, the quantity of investments that people will undertake will increase from Q0 to Q1. Faham? Understand? Fantastic. Now, this is if the interest rate is positive. If the interest rate goes all the way here, negative, okay, can I clarify, right? The MEI curve ends at this axis. The MEI curve does not go indefinitely on and on forever. Okay, because if real interest rate is negative, then you're gonna get negative returns on investment. You invest, you don't gain money, you lose money, people. The cost of borrowing is negative. You need to pay money to borrow. Likewise, the return on investment is negative. You invest, it's negative profitability. 你输钱. Okay? So as a result, will people increase investment or not? Obviously not, right? They will try to get their money out of Australia because it's damn unprofitable to do business in Australia now. That's why I have a decrease. I can also write this as the fact that I have a decrease. Walao. Oh dear, I was writing in white. Yeah, so I have a decrease in demand for Australian currency and also Australian assets. So as a result, if the demand for currency and assets decreases, I will result in a depreciation, not an appreciation. Okay, so please don't make the same misconception that I did. What I illustrated for you is assuming that interest rate stays positive. If interest rate is negative, it will result in a depreciation, not an appreciation, not an increase in investment. I will decrease investment. Understand? So far, any questions? Why am I asking that? I'm recording a video. But yes, if you have any questions, please find a way to clarify them. Okay? So now let us go on to the slightly more contestable questions. This one, right? I found the question very, very strange. Because intuitively, when we talk about stronger exchange rate appreciation, we if you recall, right, what is our stance towards appreciation? You recall this acronym GRAMA, gradual and modest appreciation of our Singapore currency. Why do we want gradual and modest appreciation? In normal times, right, why do we want a strong Singapore dollar? Why is it that MAS prides itself on having one of the strongest currencies in the world? It's because, right, if you have a very strong currency, what is the value of a currency? The HCI lecture notes don't like to phrase it like this, right? But I find that it's a very good cognitive way of thinking about this. What does the value of a currency measure? Okay, let's say I don't have currencies at all. Let's say we go back to 4000 BC, where I don't have a money system, I just trade goods. So if let's say I am a producer of very fine grape vines that produce very, very good wine, and then the value of my wine is very, very high. So with the wine that I sell to other people, I can trade this for things I want, like shoes, apples, pigs, donkeys, etc. So if the value of my wine, that is the currency that I'm using to pay other people, is very high, then the purchasing power of the thing that I'm using to pay other people is also very high. So I only need a very, very small unit of what I am using to pay people to get a very, very high quantity of things that I want that other people are giving me in return. Gets? So of course, we don't use wine, pigs, sheep, donkeys as currency anymore because it's 2026. We use currencies as currency. Wow. So if I'm Singapore, right, I pay other people in SGD. Other people pay me in their own currency. So if my currency is stronger than theirs, then I will need a smaller numerical quantity of SGD to buy the same quantity of goods and services as compared to their weaker currency. Okay, there's a reason why one tube of toothpaste in Singapore costs $3, one tube of toothpaste in Indonesia costs 30,000 rupiah. It's because the SGD is so much stronger than the rupiah. That's why I only need 3 units, $3 of SGD to buy one tube of toothpaste. Whereas the same tube of toothpaste, because the purchasing power, the value of the Indonesian rupiah is so much weaker, that's why I need 30,000 units of rupiah to buy the same tube of toothpaste. Has the inherent value of the good changed? No. What has changed? The inherent value of the currency that I'm using to buy the good. Gets? So now do you understand why a strong Singapore dollar is so good? Because things are cheaper for us as Singaporeans, as people who do business, earn our salaries in SGD. But what did we learn? We learned that we actually want to use depreciation or at least go to net zero appreciation during times of deep recession. I'm not sure if you recall in March 2026, right after somebody in the White House did something and caused a major war in the Middle East, right? There was a Straits Times article. I'm not sure if I can find it. Yeah, there was actually this particular Straits Times article in March of 2020. Ah, yeah. You see, the central bank will set the rate of Singapore's dollars appreciation to 0%. We try not to do depreciation on purpose, precisely because of how important a strong SGD is to us. But during times like this, right, where there is a recession, we set zero appreciation. Why? Because actually, when we have a weaker currency will actually improve our balance of trade. By the Marshall-Lerner condition, by the Marshall-Lerner condition, if I have depreciation, I will improve my balance of trade provided PEDX plus PEDM is sorry plus PEDM is greater than 1. Now, PEDM in Singapore is obviously not greater than 1. It's obviously price inelastic in demand because we need to import what? That's why we have a high degree of necessity. But is PEDX greater than 1? Are our exported goods price elastic in demand? Yes, right? Because what is it that Singapore exports? Electronic goods, some pharmaceuticals. Ultimately, you can argue that our biggest export is the brains of our citizens, lah, but let's not get into that. Basically, right, what is the common thing in all of this? Do you need to be in Singapore to manufacture them? No, right? You can set up a production plant for electronic goods for pharmaceuticals in Taiwan, in China, even in Vietnam now they are developing a lot of infrastructure there. The point is, Singapore's exports have a very high degree of substitutability because you don't need to buy electronic goods from Singapore. You can buy electronic goods from other countries that maybe even have greater comparative advantage in producing it as compared to us. So because of this very high degree of substitutability, Singapore's exports are considered to be price elastic in demand. That's why the Marshall-Lerner condition actually does apply to Singapore. Okay? So how does that link to what we are looking at here? I forgot to mention, right? Whenever the question asks you about is something likely to be of overall benefit to Singapore, is something likely to harm Singapore's economy? If they do not talk about micro or macro, it's up to you to interpret the question. You can talk about the micro goals of efficiency and equity, or you can talk about the 4 micro goals of, I'm sure you can name the micro goals, right? It's 9:24 p.m. Holy shit, it's late at night. Yeah, I don't want to go through this for any longer than I absolutely have to. So yeah, you know what I mean. Anyway, back to the question. I'm sorry to have digressed so much, but I hope you can have a better understanding of the theory now and can approach the question. So I'm just going to go through the question very, very quickly. Singapore has high import dependence because it has a small and open economy, yada 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 yada. Now, in addition to imported inputs being cheaper in domestic currency, that's why because my imported inputs are cheaper in domestic currency, my cost of production go down, I decrease the horizontal portion of the AS. Okay, and at the same time, why is it that my AD will increase? No, my AD is decreasing. Why? Because by the MLC, appreciation, a stronger exchange rate will worsen the balance of trade, not improve. Okay, and balance of trade X minus M is a component of AD. You need to explicitly state that it's a component of AD. Did they do that here? No, they didn't. Yeah, please do add here that X minus M is a component of AD. Then only this conclusion will follow. Okay, so you can also consider that actually making imported inputs cheaper in domestic currency means that the cost of production of goods for export is lower, and if I can potentially pass these cost savings on to the foreign country that purchase our exports, I can actually improve my export price competitiveness. But I will not write that here. Why? Because that goes against what I'm arguing, right? I'm arguing that AD will decrease. Traditionally, when we talk about maybe supply side policies, maybe some kind of other innovation policy to improve export price competitiveness, I always mean that because price of exports go down, my export revenue increases. But that is the opposite of what I'm arguing here. So it's just something for you to consider for the future when we are talking about appreciation, when we are talking about this point in blue. It is not relevant to the present discussion. In fact, it will be antithetical to the present discussion because we are arguing that AD will decrease. Okay? So R2 obviously is going to be the not very good things. Please change this demand to quantity demanded here. Okay? Because if price increases, exports becoming more expensive. I am not increasing demand. I have not changed any demand factor. This is a movement along the demand curve, not a change in demand. This is not shift of demand curve. This is movement along the demand curve. I say again. Okay? So it's quantity demanded that change. The answer key is wrong. Yeah, Hua Chong. Anyway, assuming that there's a decrease in the real trade balance, can you summon the Marshall-Lerner condition here? I have asked Mr. Yong Hong about this. His answer is that the Marshall-Lerner condition, because technically it applies to BOT, you can use it to argue that it worsens the balance of trade. So you can summon the MLC here even though the answer key hasn't. But you still, of course, need to talk about the fact that real trade balance alters what? It alters X minus M in AD. Then only I can talk about how AD will decrease. Okay? Then because AD decreases, I have the reverse multiplier process. Can I emphasize here, right? If this were an essay, of course, I will ask you to write the entire reverse multiplier paragraph. But let's be honest. 8 marks. Everything that you're writing here is actually worth more than 8 marks in terms of the amount of handwriting that you need to do. So even if there are some CSQ answer keys that Troy Touch would say that you die need to write the full reverse K in order to get an analytical grade, else it's going to be a cursory. You can afford to let that 1 mark go, okay? It's not worth it. It's not worth the time to get that extra 1 mark, okay? And then ultimately, you need to link to as many macro goals as possible. So I talk about growth, I talk about price stability, I link to cyclical unemployment. Why cyclical unemployment? Because if I have a fall in production, fall in real national output from Y0 to Y1, then firms incentivized by profitability will cut back on their employment of factors of production, including labor, because labor is in derived demand. Understand? Fantastic. Now for your summative conclusion, I actually recommend putting your summative conclusion in front. So likewise, I don't like this answer key. I think this should have been in front. Your summative conclusion is that a strong Singapore dollar would not be of overall benefit to Singapore when the economy is in deep recession. And this did indeed talk about the 0% appreciation. So Singapore has done 0% appreciation more recently during the... Okay, currently the global economy is not in recession because of Trump being Trump lah. It's just that there have been inflationary pressures worldwide. And as a result, sometimes the external demand for Singapore's goods and services is decreasing. That's why we are concerned that our AD is decreasing. We might be at risk of experiencing a slowdown in actual growth because of the Middle East problems. But the global economy was properly in a recession. And in fact, the Singapore economy did actually enter into a legitimate recession during COVID. And during COVID, we also did practice this 0% appreciation. Why 0%? Why not depreciation? Once again, because if we depreciate now, right, then after COVID, it's going to be very, very hard to get our currency strong again. Then there will be long-term effects on the fact that our currency is not strong. We are more prone to imported inflation, yada 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 yada. And I think the fact that our electricity bills have gone up by 30% in the 16 days since July has started is also a testament to how prone Singapore is to imported inflation, such that the lack of oil, right, the lack of imported factor inputs for energy can raise our prices by so much, 30% of electricity bills. Yeah, so we are really, really prone to imported inflation. Can you imagine if our Singapore dollar was not as strong as it currently is, how much more we will need to pay for electricity than we currently are? That's why at most we have zero appreciation. We will never, never, never let the Singapore dollar get weaker than it currently is. Because then our imported inflation will be worse and everybody will be angry. Okay, last part. Discuss whether fiscal policy. Okay, what do you notice about this question? This is a very 15-mark question, right? This looks like a 15-mark essay question. So the main difficulty here, how much of a 15-mark essay question do you need to write for 10 marks? The real answer is there is no fixed answer. It depends on the mark scheme. So my personal advice, okay, for 10-mark essays is what is the biggest difference between an 8 and 10-mark essay in a CSQ and a 15-mark evaluative essay in your paper 2. Notice how, right, on top I show you again, I have R1, I have R2, I have conclusion. Here, I have R1, I have R2, I have conclusion. What do I not have? Versus, I show you some of the paper 2 answer keys, also by Hua Chong. My paper 2, part B, this is also a policy essay. No, this is not a policy essay. This is a policy essay. I have R1, EV1, R2, EV2, EV, summative conclusion. What do you notice? There is no intermediate evaluation. All your evaluation goes in the summative conclusion. Okay? So, basically, whatever ideas you want to bring in, right? Whatever R's you want to discuss, you don't need to raise contestable points that would demand an intermediate evaluation. For example, fiscal policy. Normally, what will be my IEV for fiscal policy? I will say something like, oh, for Australia, maybe crowding out effect is relevant, maybe. Or I can say that, oh, my AD increase here, my general price level increase. Demand pull inflation is bad because yada yada. That can be an IEV. What else can be an IEV for limitations of fiscal policy? Potentially, I can talk about the fact that in the extracts, okay, in the extracts, can you find the place in extract 1? Okay, flip to extract 1 now. There's a place in extract 1 where they say, where is that thing? Yes, they talk about the already fragile consumer confidence. Can you find this place in extract 1? So if consumer confidence is already fragile, right, then they may not be very receptive. No matter how much subsidies I provide to childcare, to what else in the extracts did they say they're providing subsidies for? Stimulus and support measures, rent assistance, childcare subsidies. If consumer confidence is already very, very low, I don't want to buy. No matter how many subsidies you give me, I also won't want to buy, right? That's the most relevant IEV to the case context. So please don't go, if you absolutely insist on writing an intermediate evaluation for a CSQ, it can get you your evaluation marks, you can. But please choose an IEV that you can find from the extract. Don't go and pull one random hypothetical limitation of fiscal policy that you pull out of thin air. Okay, this is a CSQ. The extracts are picked, not your own knowledge of the lecture notes. Okay. Next, yeah, even though the question is discuss whether fiscal policy is the most effective way, right? Even though it's phrased like that, a layman who hasn't studied econs might think, okay, this is a discursive essay. I will talk about why fiscal policy is effective. I will talk about why fiscal policy is not effective. But as you probably know after studying econs for 1.5 years, the correct way to write this essay is R2 should be another policy. In fact, right, the fact that the examiner's report had to explicitly state that R2 should be about some other policy like supply side policy, right? Means that actually in 2022, got a lot of candidates go and write R1, fiscal policy is good. R2, oh no, fiscal policy is not effective. So please, don't be like these kinds of candidates who think even at this stage that the way that the question is phrased means you need to change your approach. How an econs question is phrased, right? I'll be honest, the nuances don't matter nearly as much as how a GP question is phrased. Just stick to your trading. R1 fiscal policy, R2 another policy. Then your summative conclusion needs to talk about how effective are the two policies. So yeah, the talk about raising the money supply to boost AD, lowering of interest rates into liquidity preference. I showed you the diagram earlier. What else do I want to point out? Yes. When we talk about short-run supply side policies, right, I have subsidies for wages, rentals, and utilities. So can I point out that the point of these subsidies this is the subsidy for individuals or for businesses? For businesses, right? So therefore, it's going to decrease the cost of production of businesses. I shift the horizontal range of the AS. Understand? Okay. Yeah. They talk about the liquidity trap here for monetary policy. I suggest writing supply side policy for R2 because we want breadth, right? I don't want two demand side policies as far as possible. I want to have one demand side policy and one supply side policy. So liquidity trap, right, is basically to say in order to decrease interest rates, I need to increase this money supply. Do I even have the money to supply or not? That's what the liquidity trap is. Understand? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, you can look through the rest of this answer key on your own. I don't think there's anything else I need to point out. Okay, yes, we are done. I'm tired. My voice is almost gone, and it is 9:36 p.m. Thank you very much. Bye bye.